Picture a Norse crew, middle of the Baltic. The kind of silence that sits on water before sunrise. One of the men leans over to the helmsman and says a single word, just one. And the helmsman crosses his arms over his chest and doesn't speak again for an hour. The word was Finn. It moved through the deck like cold water. The Finnic peoples, the ancestors of modern Finns, Karelians, Tavastians, lived next door to the Norse world. Different language, different gods. During the Viking Age, roughly 750 to 1100 CE, they traded with the Norse, fought them, and sometimes sailed alongside them. And somehow, these battle-hardened Norse warriors, men who wrote poetry about dying well, looked north and east toward Finland and felt something a sword couldn't fix. That's what this is about. The Finnic-speaking peoples of the Viking Age covered a wide geography and a range of cultures. The Finns and Tavastians in the southwest and interior. The Karelians pushing further east toward Lake Ladoga and the river routes beyond. And up in the far north, the Sami, reindeer herders, hunters, a people with deep roots in the Arctic landscape, and in the Norse imagination, the most dangerous spiritual power in the known world. The Norse sometimes gathered all of them under one word, Finnar, a compass direction and a state of mind combined. North, east, outside, the kind of place where the rules change. These people were wired into the Baltic trade network. Furs, beaver, squirrel, sable were the oil of the medieval economy, and Finland had them in abundance. Iron, tar, amber, dried fish, all of it moving through coastal routes connecting the Finnish interior to Norse merchants, and eventually the great river roads south into Rus and Byzantium and the Islamic world. The Norse needed what Finland had. That meant contact. Real, sustained, complicated contact. Trade was only one layer of it. Here's the part people miss, and it changes everything. In the old Norse sagas and poems, there's a form of magic called Seiðr. Prophecy, spiritual manipulation, the bending of fate. When the sagas name the most powerful practitioners of Seiðr again and again, they point north, they point east, they point at the Finnar. Snorri Sturluson, writing in the 13th century but drawing on much older traditions, describes Odin himself as a practitioner of Seiðr. The implication woven through several sources is that this knowledge came from the margins of the Norse world, from the north. Sit with that for a moment. The Norse are crediting their own gods' most dangerous power to the people they lived beside, and frankly, often looked down on. That tension, fear, wrapped inside condescension, runs through almost every Norse description of the Finnar. Dismissive, terrified, both at once. The sagas portray these northerners as weather workers who could summon storms to sink ships, shapeshifters, people who could send their souls traveling while their bodies sat still, sorcerers who could bind the wind into knots and sell it to sailors. You want fair weather crossing the Baltic? You might need to find one of them first. The magic itself is worth sitting with, because this was serious practice, taken seriously by the people who lived it. Among the Sami, the central ritual figure was the Noaidi, healer, intermediary, the human hinge between the living world and the world beneath it. The Noaidi worked with a drum, a runebomme, painted with images of the layered cosmos. Through drumming and deep trance, the Noaidi's soul could leave the body entirely, to negotiate with spirits, to trace the source of an illness back to its root, to see what the hunt would bring or what the war would cost. Later sources and the archaeological evidence both point toward this as genuine practice. Ritual burials across the northern regions and written accounts from centuries after the Viking Age that describe these traditions in consistent detail. Further south, among the Finnic-speaking peoples closer to the Baltic coast, The tradition ran through Runo-Singing, oral incantation. The spell was the word, and the word carried power because it carried origin. If you knew where iron came from, truly knew it in the deep poetic sense, you could command iron. If you knew the birth of fire, of water, of a sickness eating someone from the inside, you could move against it. The great figure of this tradition is Wainamoinen, ancient, born from the primordial waters, carrying all the world's knowledge inside him. He wins by singing longer, deeper, and truer than anyone else alive. His weapon is memory. Everyday life ran through this same current. Protection charms carved into objects, hunting luck spoken over arrows before the draw, navigation charms for open water. Prayer, medicine, and magic ran as one continuous thread through everything. And this is where it gets strange, because the Norse built this mythology out of lived contact. They were there. They crossed that water. They traded in those settlements. Some of them stayed. We'll call him Ulfr, a fictional composite of the kind of man who made this crossing season after season. Late summer, some year in the 870s. Ulfr's ship is making for the Karelian coast with silver and wool and a few blades. One of his crew, young, first real voyage, has been burning with fever since they left Gotland, saying things in his sleep, syllables no one on the ship understands. Someone on shore knows someone. Someone always does. They lead Ulfr to a man at the edge of the settlement, older than he looks or younger, it's hard to tell. He has a drum across his knees and he doesn't greet Ulfr, doesn't acknowledge him at all. He starts drumming, slow at first. The fire catches the symbols painted on the skin. The man sings, a sound with no melody Ulfr can name, aimed at something past the firelight. His eyes go somewhere else entirely. An hour, maybe more. Then he stops. He says something. The interpreter turns to Ulfr. There was a thing that followed the boy from the water. I have spoken with it. It will leave. He should not eat fish for 7 days. Ulfr carries that answer back to the ship and says nothing. The boy recovers. Trance-based healing and shamanic ritual were genuine, documented practices in Sami and Finnic culture. Later ethnographic sources and the archaeological record both support this. Norse traders absolutely reached these coasts and these communities. Whether any given Norseman witnessed a Noaidi ceremony firsthand, we can't say for certain. The sagas are full of northern sorcerers, full of Finnar with uncanny power, and those images didn't come from nowhere. Contact shapes belief. Fear travels with the cargo. The crossing never felt shorter after that. If anything, the water felt deeper. 3 things people get wrong, quickly. 1. Finns were Vikings. Viking describes an activity, raiding, trading, moving, carried out by Norse-speaking people from Scandinavia. Finnic peoples had their own distinct languages, traditions, and spiritual lives. Some may have crewed Norse ships. They were part of the same world. They were their own people within it. 2. Finnish shamanism and Norse Seiðr are basically the same thing. They overlapped and likely shaped each other across centuries of contact. They also grew from different roots, in different languages, inside different cosmologies. The connection is genuine. Treating them as interchangeable does a disservice to both. 3. The Kalevala is a Viking Age text. The Kalevala was compiled in 1835 by Elias Lönnrot from oral traditions collected across Finland and Karelia. It almost certainly carries material far older than the 19th century. It is also a 19th century book. Know what you're citing before you cite it. Back to where we started. A Norse crew on dark water. One word to the helmsman, Finn. That word carried a particular weight. The kind that comes from knowing there are ways of moving through the world that your own tradition can't account for. The Finnic and Sámi peoples of the Viking Age were the neighbors, the rivals, the trading partners, and in the Norse mind the keepers of something older and stranger than Valhalla. The Norse built their identity around courage, around walking into death with your name intact. Courage holds when you know the shape of what you're facing. The North offered no such shape. The Finnar had been reading the world in a language older than the sagas, longer than the runes, deeper than the reach of any iron blade. That's where the fear lived, and that's where it stayed. If that's the kind of history you want, the edges, the margins, the pieces that don't fit the standard story, subscribe to Ancient Witness. Drop a comment with which Northern or Baltic culture you want next, because the Balts have a story that makes this one look simple